All right, so we've got a pretty hefty stack of news and analysis here today.
Yeah, looks like a lot to get through.
It is. It's quite a bit. It's a real mix of political shakeups, trade tensions, and some pretty interesting signals coming from the housing market.
Yeah, 2025 is starting off with a bang.
You can say that again. So
Mhm.
let's try to unpack this for everyone listening and see what insights we can extract from all this information.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, first off, we've got Trump back in the White House.
Round two.
Round two, exactly. And he's not alone this time. He's brought Elon Musk on board as a special government employee.
Yeah, that raised some eyebrows for sure.
You think? That alone is enough to make headlines, but it's the actions they're taking that really have people talking.
Yeah, they're not wasting any time.
What's your take on all this?
Well, the speed and scope of the changes are pretty unprecedented. We're seeing agencies like USAS effectively getting shut down, headquarters or sealed off staff are on administrative leave programs, are frozen.
Wow.
There's a lot of confusion about what's happening, and
It sounds like chaos.
it is. It's chaotic. And it's not just USAID. There are reports of similar moves at other federal agencies, the EPA, for example.
Yeah, I read that too. It seems like a pretty drastic approach to government reform.
It is, and the legality of these actions is already being challenged.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Congress never approved these moves.
I see.
So there's a growing sense of unease about whether the executive branch is overstepping its boundaries.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially with what Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is up to.
DOGE, as they're calling it.
DOGE.
Hmm.
Yeah. They're reportedly being granted access to sensitive treasury systems, the ones that handle things like Social Security payments and tax refunds.
That's a bold move.
Bold. That's one way to put it. It's raising a lot of eyebrows, even among some Republicans.
I can see why people are concerned about the potential for misuse or even abuse of these systems.
Exactly.
A sovereign wealth fund, which is what this DOGE thing is essentially creating, can be a powerful tool for economic development,
Right.
but it also raises concerns about transparency and accountability.
So what does all this mean for the average person listening to this right now?
Well, if you rely on government services or benefits,
Social Security, Medicare, things like that.
exactly, you'll want to pay close attention to how these changes unfold. There's a lot of uncertainty right now about how these agencies will operate.
Yeah. And potential disruptions are a real concern.
Definitely. It's also worth considering the potential impact on the economy as a whole. This level of government upheaval can create uncertainty and volatility, which can ripple throughout various sectors.
Okay, so we've got this massive reshuffling happening at the federal level, but then there's the international scene where things are heating up as well. It seems like we're in a full-blown trade war.
Yeah, with Trump imposing tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, and China.
And they're not small tariffs either. These are significant.
No, they're not. Economists are estimating that they could cost the average American household over $1,200 per year.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right. That's due to increased prices on everyday goods.
That's a pretty big hit to the wallet. Though, there is a bit of good news for avocado lovers out there.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like the tariffs on Mexico are on pause for now.
That's right. They reached a deal.
Something about increased border security, right?
Yeah, Mexico has agreed to increase border security measures, including deploying troops to crack down on drug trafficking.
That's a pretty big concession.
It is. It seems to have appeased the administration for the time being, but the situation remains fluid.
So maybe you're paying a little less for your guacamole? But the broader economic implications of these trade wars are still a major concern. The tariffs on Canada and China are still in place, and that's creating a lot of uncertainty in the global markets.
Yeah, and we're even seeing some spillover into the cryptocurrency world.
Really?
Yeah, there's definitely some volatility there as a result of all this.
Huh. Interesting. So we've got this trade war raging on, and that uncertainty is also bleeding into the U.S. housing market.
It is. We're seeing some interesting shifts taking place with signs that we might be moving away from the strong seller's market we've seen in recent years.
Now, this is where things get really interesting for anyone thinking about buying or selling a home.
Definitely a lot to pay attention to.
We've been hearing about a housing shortage for years, but now some experts are suggesting that we could be heading towards an oversupply.
That's one of the theories out there.
That's driving that shift.
Well, one of the main factors is a significant increase in foreclosure starts. We're seeing over 50% more foreclosures month over month.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. It indicates that a lot of homeowners are struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments.
That's a pretty alarming statistic. But wouldn't an increase in foreclosures also mean more options for potential buyers?
It could. More inventory could lead to more choices and potentially lower prices for buyers.
So it's not all bad news.
Not necessarily, but it's important to remember that this is just one piece of the puzzle. There are a lot of other factors at play here.
Right, like what?
Well, for example, you've got a whole pool of potential buyers who have been sitting on the sidelines, patiently saving while the stock market was going crazy.
Right, they were waiting for the bubble to burst.
Exactly. Now, with all this economic uncertainty, they might be looking for a safer place to park their money. Real estate often looks pretty good in times like these.
So you could see this influx of buyers combined with the increase in inventory from foreclosures, creating a shift in the balance of power in the housing market.
It's definitely possible. It could give buyers more leverage than they've had in recent years.
So while rising foreclosures might seem like a bad thing on the surface, it could actually create opportunities for those looking to enter the housing market.
It's all about understanding the dynamics at play and being ready to adapt.
That's a great point. Things are changing fast, and those who can adapt quickly will be the ones who come out ahead.
I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still more to discuss. So stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll delve deeper into the housing market and explore some other fascinating developments.
It's going to be an interesting ride.
Buckle up, everybody. It's going to be a wild one.
It really is. And we also have to think about the impact of Trump's immigration policies.
Oh, right, with the threats of mass deportations.
Exactly. That could have a ripple effect on the construction industry, which is already facing labor shortages.
That's true. Fewer workers means fewer homes being built,
Right, which could further limit the supply of new homes.
and drive prices up, even if demand starts to cool down.
It's definitely a complex situation with a lot of moving parts.
Absolutely. And speaking of complex, let's shift gears and talk about what's happening in Texas.
Texas, always a hot topic.
Always with property taxes. While all this drama is unfolding on the national stage, Governor Abbott is trying to tackle the issue of skyrocketing property taxes.
Property taxes in Texas are a perennial issue.
They are,
Yeah.
and they're not getting any better.
Not from what I've seen.
He's proposing a pretty ambitious plan, though.
He is. Using billions from the state's surplus to provide some relief to homeowners.
Yeah, and it's speeding up the process of compressing tax rates.
Right. And closing loopholes that allow local governments to raise taxes without voter approval.
It sounds pretty good on paper.
It does. It shows that state leaders are recognizing the growing burden of property taxes on homeowners.
But is it enough to really move the needle?
That's the big question. One of the experts we read,
The realtor.
yeah, the one who's been in the business for decades,
Right.
he argues that it might not be enough to truly solve the problem.
He thinks we need more fundamental change.
A fundamental rethink of how we buy, build, and sell homes.
Yeah, he was pretty adamant about that.
He argued the current system is too easily manipulated.
Yeah, with appraisal districts and lenders essentially given free rein during the pandemic,
Exactly, which led to a lot of speculation and inflated prices.
and ultimately priced out many first-time homebuyers.
That's his argument.
So what's the solution then?
Well, he didn't offer any easy answers,
Figures.
but he stressed the need to address the systemic issues that contribute to these price swings.
And ensure that the market is working for everyone, not just a select few.
That's the goal, right?
In a perfect world.
Yeah.
So, as you can see, the situation is pretty dynamic both at the national and state levels.
Lots going on.
We've got a lot of uncertainty, a lot of potential for change, a lot of factors to consider.
Keeps things interesting.
But amidst all of this, there are also some interesting side stories emerging.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, for instance, there's a report that Trump has renewed his suggestion that the United States could retake the Panama Canal by force,
Whoa, hold on. Really?
citing Chinese involvement.
That's a bit out of left field.
It might seem like a wild card, but it speaks to a broader geopolitical tension that's been simmering beneath the surface.
Trump has consistently framed China as an economic and strategic rival,
Right, and this rhetoric seems to be escalating.
with actions backing it up, from tariffs to threats about the Panama Canal.
It suggests a more assertive, even aggressive foreign policy approach.
You could say that. And it's not just China. There's a lot of internal turmoil within the State Department as well.
What do you mean?
Senator Schatz from Hawaii is placing a hold on all State Department nominees
Wow, why?
until the administration clarifies its stance on U.S. aid.
He's not letting anyone through till he gets some answers.
Essentially. And this highlights the level of frustration and concern among some lawmakers about the administration's actions
They're worried about the impact on America's global standing.
and the potential consequences for foreign policy.
Yeah, I can see why they'd be concerned. And yet, amidst all this, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been strangely quiet.
You'd think he'd be front and center.
He would. But in one of the articles, he finally breaks his silence.
What did he have to say?
He makes a rather startling claim. He says he's now the acting director of USAID.
Wait a minute. Didn't Trump hand the reins over to Musk?
That's what we thought.
Now Rubio is stepping in, casting USAID as an uncooperative and opaque agency.
Almost trying to justify the administration's actions by painting it in a negative light.
It's a confusing situation. Who's really in charge of American foreign policy? Rubio, Musk, Trump himself.
It's a tangled web for sure. And speaking of tangled webs, there's this whole thing about Buckley Space Force Base in Colorado being used as a staging area for immigration enforcement.
That's a military installation?
It is. It suggests an escalation of the administration's hardline immigration policies.
Especially coming on the heels of Trump's campaign rhetoric about Aurora, Colorado being overrun by a Venezuelan gang.
Which he's now using to justify deploying federal agents to the area.
Using fear-mongering and potentially exaggerated claims to justify policies that target vulnerable populations.
It can have long-term consequences for social cohesion and public trust.
It's a dangerous game to play.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about Trump's executive order to create a sovereign wealth fund.
Right. Essentially, taking proceeds from U.S. national resources like oil and gas and using them for investments.
But critics are worried about mismanagement and corruption.
Especially given the lack of transparency around how this fund will be managed.
It could be used to enrich Trump and his allies rather than benefit the American people as intended.
Follow the money, right.
Always. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas.
The situation there is still very tense.
Trump just met with Netanyahu, and it seems like the ceasefire is incredibly fragile.
Trump himself said there are no guarantees that the peace will hold.
And with Netanyahu facing pressure from his own right-wing coalition to take a more aggressive stance,
the situation remains highly volatile.
So we have this simmering international conflict coupled with domestic political turmoil, economic uncertainty, and a potential shift in the housing market.
It's a lot to digest.
It is. It's a challenging time for sure. But even in the midst of chaos, there are always opportunities for positive change.
I like that perspective. It's easy to get bogged down in all the negativity, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we have the power to shape the future.
And speaking of shaping the future, let's circle back to the housing market. Despite all the doom and gloom, there are some glimmers of hope for those looking to buy a home.
We've got increasing inventory, potentially softening prices, and a pool of qualified buyers waiting in the wings.
So it's not all bad news.
It might actually be a good time for those who are ready to make a move.
But of course, there are still challenges. Affordability remains a major issue, and the potential impact of mass deportations on the construction industry is a real concern.
It's a mixed bag.
Not all sunshine and roses, but not all doom and gloom either. Somewhere in between.
Which is why it's so important to stay informed and be strategic.
Knowledge is power, as they say. And that brings us back to you, our listener. What does all this mean for you? What should you be doing with all this information? That's what we'll explore in the final part of this deep dive.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive. Political power plays, trade wars, a volatile housing market, even international conflicts. It's a lot, and you're probably wondering, what does this all mean for me? Like, what am I supposed to do with all this information?
Right. It's a lot to process. And a natural reaction to all this crazy news is to just feel overwhelmed.
Exactly.
But first and foremost, don't panic. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, but it's important to stay level-headed and focus on what you can control.
That's solid advice. So, what would that look like in practice? What are some concrete steps you can take?
Well, let's stick with the housing market for a second. If you're thinking about buying a home, now might be a good time to start doing your research.
Okay.
Get pre-approved for a mortgage, explore different neighborhoods, talk to some real estate agents.
So be prepared. Exactly. Don't just wait for things to happen. Be proactive. Get ahead of the curve.
Would you say that applies to other areas as well?
Absolutely. Whether it's managing your finances, planning for retirement, or even just staying informed about current events, being proactive and informed puts you in a better position to adapt and make good decisions.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. The more you understand about what's happening, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the challenges and seize the opportunities that come up.
And remember, you don't have to figure everything out on your own.
Oh, absolutely not. There are resources available to help you make informed decisions.
Like what?
Financial advisors, legal professionals, community organizations. There's a whole network of support out there.
If you know where to look.
Right. It's easy to feel isolated in the face of all this complexity, but reaching out and connecting with others who have expertise or shared experiences can be incredibly valuable.
It's all about building a strong network, and leveraging the knowledge and support that's available.
And don't underestimate the power of your own voice.
Oh, that's right. We might not be able to single-handedly change the course of global events, but we can still make a difference in our own communities and hold our elected officials accountable.
Exactly. Vote. Write to your representatives. Attend town hall meetings.
Be an active citizen.
Yes. And don't forget about the power of social media.
That's true. It can be a double-edged sword, of course, but it can also be a powerful tool for sharing information, connecting with like-minded individuals, and holding those in power accountable. So even though it feels like the world is spinning a little faster these days, we still have agency.
We do. We have more power than we realize.
We can still make choices, take action, and influence the direction of things even in small ways.
It's about recognizing that we are not just passive observers. We are active participants in shaping the future, both individually and collectively.
That's a powerful message to end on. So for all of you out there feeling a little overwhelmed by the news, remember this: stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
The world is changing rapidly, but by understanding the forces at play and taking action, we can navigate these turbulent waters and create a future that reflects our values and aspirations.
Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.